Hello there, YouTube. Devin here again. Today we're going to be kind of showing you two rifles that actually have a lot of similarities and kind of unique histories within themselves, in the fact that they were actually both very, very good rifles, but were universally hated by the soldiers they were given to for the most part. So, the first rifle I have here for you is this is my Ross Mark III or M10 variant. So this one is in immaculate condition. It is a gun that has a very storied history that people like to talk about. They're known kind of colloquially for blowing up and being incredibly unreliable. I've never had any issues with mine. I've definitely been down in the dirt with mine and stuff like that, but like the downfall of the Ross actually wasn't really, looking back on it, a lot of the problems with the Ross are actually kind of myth. There was some early problems with like steel quality and everything like that. That was just like a bad batch of steel. That's happened with other rifles before, but for some reason people decided on the Ross even more than other rifles. There was problems though with these having issues with blowing up. You never hear any military instances of these blowing up because the bolt was only ever intended to be disassembled by a field armorer, somebody that knew what they were doing. It was meant to go to somebody that knew what they were doing, and the bolt was specifically designed to not be able to be taken apart. Unlike a lot of other bolts, this is actually a very, very, very closed bolt. There isn't a lot of ways for anything to get into it, very easily. It's a really self-contained system with very, very high tolerances. So a lot of particulate and everything doesn't really get into the bolt all that easy. All you would really have to do is clean the outside of it, and the rest would be fine. So people could technically disassemble the bolt wrong, reassemble the bolt wrong, and it would cause the bolt head to not rotate all the way into battery. It only rotated into battery a few degrees, so you don't take advantage of all that full locking strength. And when the round would go off, because the bolt head is case hardened, it would shear the lugs off, and it would shear part of the lugs off, and it would oftentimes just come right back out of the bolt and pretty much stop right here. There really isn't any instances of them flying out of the back of the gun and into people's head. About the biggest injury you could take from this is if you're a small guy and you get really, really up on your stock, it might catch you in the cheek. That's not going to kill you. And other than that, this is a time basically before safety glasses. You could get some of those fragments of the bolt and stuff like that into your eyes. That's also not something that's going to kill you. So that's another myth busted. A lot of people there's nobody that's ever really died from one of these, even ones that have after the wars and they were surplused, where your home gunsmiths and everything take it all apart and crap, and it's never had any issues. So I don't know why people are so afraid of them and stuff like that. And there's a really easy way to tell if your Ross bolt has been assembled correctly. Most of them went through an update after the war, where you could see right on the bolt sleeve, it'll be kind of up here in this area, there's a rivet put in that you can very clearly see that allows you to not misassemble the bolt wrong. This one doesn't have it. You could technically misassemble this one wrong. But one good way to tell if you have your bolt all the way in battery is you just don't close it all the way. So you see how there's that last, so if I do that, you can see that's closed all the way. But if you get it to the point where the bolt head is just in its position, you'll be able to tell, because the bolt sleeve will start moving forward rather than the whole bolt itself. And so you do that, and then if you pull the trigger, it'll suck the bolt all the way in. That's a good way to tell if your bolt is assembled correctly, even if you have, so if you're worried about it. If you're worried that you put it together incorrectly, if you have one, it's not all that hard to assemble correctly. It just that's a good way to tell if you have it adjusted the right way, is just before you load any ammo in it, dry fire it once like that, and if it does that, that means you assembled it correctly. If it doesn't do that, it's not assembled correctly. So this rifle served Canada through basically 1916. There was huge issues with this rifle, most of it being ammo related. That was kind of the death of this rifle, was the fact that the ammunition never really got sorted out. It was too inconsistent. They had lots of issues with sticking into the chambers and stuff like that, to the point where the rifle would just seize up. But when the rifle did work, it worked alarmingly well and to a very fair degree. This was used as a sniper rifle through all of World War One. It was used in sniper training by a few different armies through the interwar and into World War Two. So they're not bad rifles. They do what they were designed to do, and eventually they worked all the kinks out of them, and it was ready to become a great service rifle. And in 1916 they dropped it just because the stigma couldn't get past that it was a steaming pile of crap. They worked very well. Now, there was really only one nation that ever used the Ross to any degree in actual combat, and that would be the Canadians. There was Canadians out there, believe it or not, all the way through World War One that really liked the Ross. There's actually a kind of significant portion. It wasn't more than the people that didn't like the Ross, but there was a significant portion. It was like something like 20 to 25% of the Canadian Army still actually really liked the Ross. They might have been in places or had access to different kinds of ammo or other stuff like that that was better quality, whereas your regular mud cruncher, isn't gonna like all those problems or hearing those things, but a lot of the career guys really like the Ross. Rather, that comes down to that whole like national pride, and this is what I trained on, so this is the best thing ever. Could be just that, or it could be because, in my opinion, it's a fantastic rifle. It's not the best combat rifle, but it's a fantastic rifle. So as far as like anything from World War One to just go out and shoot, it definitely is one of the rarer pieces, and it's probably one of the more fun pieces to shoot just because it's so weird, but it's a excellent shooting rifle. Now, the British had something similar with their rifle. They, before World War One, as a lot of you know, were going to adopt the p14 rifle in 276 Enfield, which is a 7mm, very flat shooting, rifle. They were trying to get rid of the Lee Enfield, because, to be honest, the Lee Enfield's a horrible system, and the British even realized that they keep getting stuck with their pants down, or millions of rifles that they can't really afford to get rid of after they've dumped all of their money into a huge war, and then a second war comes along. You really can't afford to get rid of it then. But the goal before World War One was to replace the Lee Enfield with this rifle here, which is, the p14. World War One comes and they're like, well, we need rifles real bad. The British Army's quite small. They realize that their Navy can't really help them all that much as far as winning a ground war against the Germans. So they have all of these plans for the p14. They ship them off to America, and they're like, can you guys make us this, but in 303, in the standard service cartridge, which is what both of these rifles take, and it comes on a charger like this. A lot of people give me shit because I load these chargers asymmetrically. That's because this commercial ammo does not have the nice taper on the back of the rim to allow the rims to ride over each other, so they rim lock really bad in both of these rifles if you don't load them asymmetrically. So I know which way they're supposed to be loaded, but with this commercial ammo, a lot of commercial ammo actually, they rim lock. It's not really a problem with the service cartridge, so a lot of people like to cite that these guns rim lock. They do with commercial ammo. If you're using the Mark 7 ammo like it's intended, it'll ride over the rim of the cartridge below it, and the gun will work just fine with no hiccups, other than you might have to push slightly harder. So Remington and Winchester start cranking these out. There's two Remington factories making this. There was Remington and there was Remington Eddystone that were cranking out P14s and Winchester was also making P14s. None of them had interchangeable parts. The British took them anyways, which was one problem that the British really didn't like about them. They took non-interchangeable parts. You could only use the parts marked with that manufacturer, and they were marked E for Eddystone, R for Remington, and W for Winchester. This happens to be a Winchester 14 example. This is actually a relatively late one because they made like 230,000 of them, and this is number 131,061. And this rifle went through the weed and repair standard before World War II, and then it was eventually, at some point, shipped off to Canada. But the exact history of the P14 in World War I was they were kind of hated. They weren't liked because they didn't have interchangeable parts. The bayonets were pretty much the same. The cartridge was pretty much the same. But the reason the Brits didn't like them is the sights weren't fine enough. They were very into that SMLE, very, very fine blade and U-notch. And this has a pretty fine blade on it, but it has something that a lot of Europeans weren't happy with at the time, and that is peep sights. So it had a very unfamiliar sights to them. They didn't really like this, and then there's the fact that it only holds 5 rounds, whereas the SMLE holds 10. So that is an issue that the British also liked. You're reloading twice as much, the gun is open twice as much. Their soldiers preferred the SMLE. The ones that were really good shots preferred it for the finer adjustment sights for the most part, with the little worm dial on the side and everything, that very fine U-notch and blade. You can make really, really accurate shots. It was also a lot faster to shoot than the P14 because it had a much smaller degree of bolt rotation and a much shorter throw than the P14 here did. The P14 has a huge, long throw because of its Mauser-style bolt. But this is a much stronger, much more accurate rifle. It was preferred by the British marksmen who didn't like the Ross, tended to really, really like these actually because they were shorter and handier than the Ross, took the same cartridge, had basically the same sights, and it was incredibly accurate. It's something that Americans, to their credit, North Americans in general, there's a reason why they clean up a lot in the turn of the century when it comes to military shooting competitions, and it's because they have this whole thing for accuracy, and so they're very good at making accurate rifles. The Canadians and Americans are. So this rifle wasn't liked because it's basically worse in every way than the SMLE. There was only two Commonwealth countries that actually really, really liked the P14. That was the Irish, because the Irish will take pretty much anything, and the Canadians actually. And the reason the Canadians liked them is because they were more reliable than the Ross in adverse conditions, but it had a lot of stuff that they were very familiar with. They were used to that long bolt throw. They were used to the peep sights. They were used to the fact that their gun only held 5 rounds. So it's like an improvement on the Ross. They really, really, really liked these. A lot of the Canadians that were able to get their hands on these liked the fact that they could use their standard equipment still and have this rifle that with its bayonet is the same length as the Ross with its bayonet. And which is kind of weird because this rifle is actually overall a few inches shorter, lopped off the barrel, which makes it a lot handier. They also like the fact that it had a full handguard, which is something the Ross didn't have. The Ross only had half handguard, but you also save about a pound of weight on this, even though this still has a very, very heavy barrel, just like the Ross. It's shorter, so you save about a pound overall, but you get a rifle that's basically the same quality when it comes to marksmanship. So the Canadians really, really liked the P14s. The ones that could have it. It's there's diary entries and stuff like that from Canadians that were able to get these off the British before the British pretty much pulled all of them from the field, and they talked about how much they really, really liked these. And it got down to the point where before the Canadians fully adopted the SMLE, they adopted the P14, but the British then decided to basically not give them P14s. They decided to give their P14s to rear line troops to free up more SMLEs to the front and everything like that, because that is what the Commonwealth was standardizing on, was the SMLE. So the Canadians had to go get used to the SMLE, where this would have been, if you could have put this in a Canadian's hand, they probably would have been able to shoot it without really any minimum, basically no training. They probably could have figured this out pretty easily. But the SMLE took a little bit, it took about a day to get a Canadian soldier relatively efficient with the SMLE as far as how to load it, how to deal with the magazine, how to take it apart and clean it and everything like that, whereas this would have been very similar to the Ross. But the Canadians that did get these and were able to stash them, you hear good records of these being used through the war and very well liked, because they have a lot of similarities with that fine marksmanship, you know, that the Canadians were very, very used to doing at this point after cleaning up for the last basically 10 years in international shooting competitions. This had a lot of qualities that they really liked. So it's not a very well-known story, but two very fantastic rifles that were kind of brought down by a lot of the same issues. So it's a lot of little things that added up to kind of a whole big problem and this huge stigma, and then all these things get blown out of the water and brought into myth, and that myth eventually becomes reality if enough people say it. But it's not anywhere near as bad as a lot of people make out. Both of these rifles kind of had a death by 1,000 cuts rather than one huge flaw. But realistically, there's like the thing with the bolt coming out of the Ross and stuff like that. That's a catastrophic failure, but it also never happened until idiots in the civilian world got their hands on it. So it's just how it is. And you know, the P14 was a fantastic rifle, but it just wasn't what other people were, what the people it was intended for were used to. They didn't like it as much. So well, why use this hunk of junk when we could use what we already know? You know, that's then the non-interchangeable parts and whatnot. But it's overall a much better rifle than the SMLE. If I was in World War I, and I'd love to be part of the Commonwealth, you know, and all that other good stuff, this would probably have to be my choice rifle right here, the P14. I like the rimmed ammo. I like the reliability and the primary extraction of rimmed ammo, especially in the trenches and everything like that, where there's tons of dirt and mud. That good extraction is kind of the way to go. And it's a fantastic rifle. Good lockup and everything like that. Same thing with the Ross. The Ross is a very strong rifle when used correctly, and it could handle adverse conditions relatively well if it wasn't for the ammo. Like I've said before in many videos, a lot of the reason firearms don't work isn't really any fault of their own. A lot of it comes down to the ammunition. So in these, the Ross did not handle wartime ammunition very well, but it handles everything. I've run through it just fine. So thank you all for watching, you guys. Hopefully you like this kind of insight into two rifles that have kind of a similar history from a similar era and everything like that. They're both fantastic guns, and if you have either one of them, you know what I'm talking about. They're both very, very fantastic guns, and I don't know why ultimately they're so looked down upon by collectors today. I could understand back during the war and stuff like that, but I don't understand why both of these rifles have such a huge following of people that don't like them to this day, because they're immaculate rifles. They're two of my favorite rifles, pretty much. They're easily in my top 5. So both of them. But thank you so much for watching, you guys. Hopefully I'll see you all in the next video.